What makes the ideal samurai? What makes the ideal commander? What makes the ideal warrior? Is it heroic actions, battlefield valor, their loyalty? Is it their charisma, their willpower, their great deeds? Is it those they've slain, the brutality they've shown, and the dread they inspire? Is it how far they persevered, how long they've crawled, scratching with nails and biting teeth to reach the top? There is a name that existed at the height of the Sengoku period, one which arose from the desperation of the lower classes and eventually became one of the most feared names throughout all of samurai history. A warrior, a general, a daimyo, one of the 7 spears of Shizugatake, a tiger hunter, and a legend like no other. It is here I will tell you the story of one of Japan's most fearsome samurai leaders, Kato Kiyomasa. In the year 1562, a boy was born to the local blacksmith in the village of Nakamura, located within Owari province. In childhood, it is said that he was called Toranosuke, and there is a chance he may have lived his whole life in the obscurity of low status, were it not for one fateful detail. His father is believed to have passed away while the boy was still young, leaving his mother to care for him, and as it just so happened, she was distantly related to the mother of the future Taiko, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. For this reason, the two became acquainted, and with Hideyoshi's own rise out of the lower classes and into samurai status under the prominence of the Oda clan, Hideyoshi saw fit to call upon the boy to military service. In 1574, at perhaps as early as just 14 years old, the boy would take his first steps into the warrior life which would come to define him. Forever after, he was now Kato Kiyomasa. Under Hideyoshi, Kiyomasa was exposed to warfare on an unparalleled level. While many generals fought ceaselessly for their lord, very few could say that they were on the forefront of some of the largest campaigns of the period. Hashiba Hideyoshi, as he was known at this time, was one of Oda Nobunaga's top commanders. To this, Nobunaga had entrusted Hideyoshi with a grand march westward against the mighty Mori clan and their allies throughout the Chugoku region. Perhaps due to the loss of Kiyomasa's father, it is believed that Hideyoshi may have decided to take the role of a mentor to him, teaching him the ways of war through first-hand experience. Indeed, they must have come to form a close bond. These were the last days of the Oda, as Nobunaga's power reached its apex, and around Hideyoshi, he developed a significant band of trusted retainers. Figures not only as Kiyomasa, but others such as Ishida Mitsunari, Fukushima Masanori, Otani Yoshitsugu, and Kurora Kanbei, forming perhaps one of the most legendary warbands of the age, as such significant figures would all become prominent names in their own right. It was through this campaign, working alongside such notable figures and learning the lessons of war, that Kiyomasa truly grew into an experienced warrior. Yet, change was to come, as the Oda were destined to fall, and the balance of power in Japan was set to be reforged. This was the death of Oda Nobunaga in 1582 at the hands of another prominent Oda general, Akechi Mitsuhide. Hideyoshi, who had been deep in the west, laying siege to Takamatsu Castle in Bichu province, was quick to broker a truce with the Mori so that he could rush back to avenge his fallen lord. The two mighty armies of the Hashiba and Akechi would meet at a location known as Yamazaki, due west of Kyoto. The clash that raged there is seen as the first great battle that Kiyomasa would participate in. Although the Hashiba held an advantage in numbers, it is said that the victor was going to be whoever was able to hold the strategic position of Mount Tenozan. Yet after hours of intense engagement, Hideyoshi's forces were able to seize the summit and claim ultimate victory over Mitsuhide. From this point on, Hideyoshi's rise to power had begun, and with Kiyomasa firmly in his camp as one of his most loyal commanders, his career too was set to flourish. But although Nobunaga had been avenged and it was becoming more and more clear that Hideyoshi was beginning to amass the majority of influence over the central regime, there were still others who opposed even him. Prime among them was Shibata Katsuie, another prominent former Oda general who now ruled over the Hokuriku region. After failing to form a more formidable coalition to challenge Hideyoshi, the two of them would finally battle it out a year after Nobunaga's death in 1583 at Shizugatake. Once again, the situation looked as if it could swing either way, with the initial campaign by Katsuie going just as planned, and with Hideyoshi delayed by the rebellion of Oda Nobutaka. Yet after the Shibata forces overextended themselves, Hideyoshi was able to seize the opportunity to quickly strike in epic fashion. It was here Kiyomasa, Masanori, and other brave warriors of the Hashiba vanguard stormed uphill to take the fight to the enemy. This would result in some of the most intense and unorthodox combat throughout the period, as the armies clashed chaotically along a densely wooded ridge. Kiyomasa fought with unparalleled ferocity. Many depictions of this event show Kiyomasa charging bravely, with his soldiers following quickly behind, waving branches of bamboo carrying severed heads of fallen warriors, those killed by Kiyomasa's violent advance. In the end, Kiyomasa would be immortalized as one of the 7 spears of Shizugatake, legendary warriors of the Hashiba who fought valiantly to secure victory that day. With this, Kiyomasa's name had transitioned into one of prominence, as Hideyoshi's new regime came into being. In the following year, he would come to participate in the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, a clash which pitted Hideyoshi against someone who would come to be a longtime rival, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Although this was a wider conflict that was actually fought across various parts of Japan, the most significant part of it took place in Owari province. However, it does not seem that Kiyomasa saw much combat here, being due to the situation which initially developed into a stalemate of entrenchment. Despite this, there is some very striking art that exists of most likely a hypothetical scenario that Kiyomasa had come to clash in one-on-one combat against the legendary Honda Tadakatsu. Following a Hashiba victory at Komaki Nagakute, in 1585 Kiyomasa received 2 important appointments. In the court, he was named as Jugoi, junior 5th rank, but on top of this, he was also bestowed with the position of Kazue no Kami, which essentially made him Hideyoshi's inspector of taxes. In just over a decade, Kiyomasa had went from being a low-born attendant to now being a recognized and decorated military leader, a momentous transition that was not lost on him. Yet his truest tests as an actual field commander were yet to come. In 1587, Kiyomasa was one of the senior commanders present within the expeditionary force during the invasion of Kyushu, in efforts to subjugate the mighty Shimazu, who had come to dominate the island. Hideyoshi, who was now coming to use the name Toyotomi, had orchestrated a grand campaign in which his generals would pour into the island from multiple directions and overwhelm the dispersed Shimazu defenders. This plan worked, as the Shimazu armies with little other choice continually withdrew back south in face of insurmountable odds, only turning briefly to launch counterattacks against the Toyotomi advance. This would lead to the Battle of Sendaigawa, where one of the most famous stories of Kiyomasa's valor would emerge. Legends say that in the chaos of the surrounding clash, Kiyomasa would engage the famed Shimazu general Niro Tadamoto in a heated one-on-one duel, in which Kiyomasa would emerge as the victor. Overall, the larger campaign would end as obviously a great success for the Toyotomi, and the whole of Kyushu would be divided up amongst Hideyoshi's loyal generals. Thus was soon to begin the portion of Kiyomasa's life as finally a daimyo. In the wake of the conquest of Kyushu, at only 26 years old, Kiyomasa would be bestowed with land in northern Higo province. Much of Kyushu had previously been under the sway of Christianity, in large thanks to Christian missionaries and the conversion of Christian daimyo and samurai. Kiyomasa, on the other hand, was a staunch practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism. Some might even go so far as to say that he was borderline fanatical. Thus, he was naturally opposed to the Christian faith and any who followed it. This makes his story all the more fascinating, as just to the south, an upstart lord by the name of Konishi Yukinaga had been awarded land in southern Higo, splitting the province between both he and Kiyomasa. Yukinaga, however, was a Christian, and immediately, tension between these two began to violently brew. A heated rivalry was coming to blossom, and would be at the forefront of their next campaigns, as each of them were set to become highly significant leaders in the coming invasion of Korea. Over the next several years, we can see the rise of another famous trait Kiyomasa would develop, that being castle building. Kiyomasa, like another famous commander of the period, Toro Takatora, would in time develop into a significant castle architect. We can see this in one of his initial accomplishments as he was tasked with building the great Nagoya castle of Hizen province, not to be confused with the Nagoya of Owari. Nagoya of Hizen would be completed by Kiyomasa in 1591 and would come to be used as the main planning and staging point for the coming conflict between Japan and the mainland. Yet, beyond Nagoya and Hizen, he would also come to have a hand in the construction of Japanese castles later in Korea, as well as his own castle in Kumamoto. Yet it is also said he had a role in the construction of the other Nagoya castle in Owari province, and supposedly, even Edo Castle. In 1592, Toyotomi Hideyoshi set in motion his most controversial action, a full-scale invasion of the Korean peninsula, known commonly today as the Imjin War. The majority of the forces used for this campaign would be mustered from the daimyo throughout western Japan, who were closest to Korea and could most easily supply troops for the cause. And we can see that the initial vanguard would come to be led by none other than Konishi Yukinaga, whose initial goal was to just seize the beachhead and await further reinforcements. However, after a successful landing and the seizure of Busan, Yukinaga decided to advance further north than was planned. It is likely he was just trying to press his advantage as the Korean army was in full retreat. However, others have also attributed this likely as an attempt to gain further prestige in the eyes of Hideyoshi. Kiyomasa, who was in charge of the 2nd Division, would land later, and he along with Kuroda Nagamasa would both tear into Yukinaga for his conduct. Yet that did not stop anything. Throughout the remainder of the war, Kiyomasa and Yukinaga would continue to compete, trying ceaselessly to outdo one another, both of them blitzing north to seize key Korean cities and push up against the northern border. And this is where we perhaps see the greatest campaign of Kiyomasa's military career, as his devastating push through northern Korea has gone down in legend. Kiyomasa's advance through the wild terrain of the northern provinces saw him achieving stunning military victories, the taking of significant political prisoners, the integration of many turncoat Korean soldiers into the Japanese army, and even a valiant but brief push over the northern border into Manchuria, making Kiyomasa the only Japanese commander to ever step foot outside Korea. Kiyomasa's ferocity during this campaign made him perhaps the most feared samurai commander to the Koreans, and it is said they even came to call him Kishokan, or the Devil General. Yet, what is also fascinating to consider was that Kiyomasa's own troops may have feared him just as much as the enemy did. He had developed a staunch distaste of many leisurely acts and pastimes that he considered were unbefitting of a warrior. In some cases, these beliefs also went counter to most other samurai of the age. To this, it is believed he may have completely forbade his soldiers from engaging in dancing and even writing poetry. There are also rumors out there that he may have been so strong in his stances on this that he would order soldiers caught engaging in these acts to commit seppuku. But it is hard to believe that such a drastic action was ever indeed taken. What this does do, however, is illustrate what his actual personality was as a warrior and commander, a side of him that was often on full display while in Korea. Yet you might ask yourself then, what might Kiyomasa have done to pass his time during lulls in the campaign? What tasks or training might he undertake to keep his skills sharpened? This is where Kiyomasa famously began to challenge the most dangerous predators in the Korean countryside, the Siberian tiger. Over a century ago, the range of the Siberian tiger once extended down into the Korean peninsula, a fearsome beast which would surely have meant certain death for most who were so unfortunate as to cross its path and draw its aggression. However, Kiyomasa himself was undeterred. To conquer such a creature would be a legendary feat, the truest test of a warrior. And thus, during his time in Korea, Kiyomasa took to hunting tigers. Now, there was more to this than just the mere accomplishment of bringing one down, as it was said that Kiyomasa also perhaps sought to send both tiger blood and meat back to Japan, to Hideyoshi. At this point in time, Hideyoshi's health was starting to fail, and there was some old legend that consuming tiger blood and perhaps even meat had some form of health benefit. There is also a rumor that suggests that this tiger meat was also dispersed among some of the troops when they were low on supplies. Regardless of his reasoning, Kiyomasa's reputation as a tiger hunter grew, so much so that it is believed that other foot soldiers began to emulate their commander and began hunting tigers themselves. Yet, this is said to have been met with disastrous results, as many soldiers started to get themselves killed by the beasts, causing a banning of the practice to save lives. Regardless, all of these fascinating details, however, regarding Kiyomasa's time in Korea during the first invasion have all come to indeed be viewed as the great highlight of his military career. If you want to learn more about his historic northern campaign in Korea, I highly recommend that you check out part 3 of my Imjin War series. This first phase of the Imjin War would of course end in a disaster for the Japanese, as with their defeat at sea causing it to be difficult to bring in fresh supplies and reinforcements, mixed with the arrival of the Chinese armies from the north, the situation began to fall apart for Japan despite their military victories and vast seizures of land. Despite this, Kiyomasa fought heroically to the bitter end, even in the face of other defeatist commanders who wished to sue for peace. Not only was Konishi Yukinaga among those calling for a swift end to hostilities, but also now was his former comrade under Hideyoshi, Ishida Mitsunari, a figure who has come to be thought more of as a bureaucrat by nature rather than an actual military leader. The militaristic Kiyomasa felt that battle-weary generals such as they who sought an end to the conflict were traitors to the cause, a sentiment that would foster deep-rooted resentment. Unfortunately, though, for Kiyomasa, despite his efforts, a peace would come. Yet, it would be short-lived, and another brief invasion would later transpire in 1597. Kiyomasa would once again be one of the most prominent commanders of this conflict, yet with the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi coming only 1 year later, and with minimal results on land this time around, Kiyomasa and the remaining Japanese armies would make their return to Japan. The developments of Korea had caused deep rifts to form between many of the commanders involved, and upon their return home, they returned to a Japan that was on the brink of another regime change. Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of the most powerful and senior daimyo in Japan, who held a mighty grip over the Kanto region, sat poised to seize the nation from the declining Toyotomi family. Upon Hideyoshi's death, he had left his young son Hideyori to succeed him, but the boy was only a child and years away from actually being able to succeed his father. Thus a council of regent lords had been assembled to steward the nation until he was of age. Yet now, Ieyasu, who had kept his forces out of the war in Korea, began plotting to take power for himself. Initially, you might expect Kiyomasa to be opposed to such an idea, being that Kiyomasa himself was not only said to be related to Hideyoshi, but had been brought up under him. Everything he was, he owed to Hideyoshi, and to stand with Ieyasu would be to destroy the regime he had established, to tear down his legacy. However, the opposing lords who stood against Ieyasu were led by none other than Ishida Mitsunari, and included other figures Kiyomasa had come to hate as well, such as Konishi Yukinaga. Kiyomasa perhaps wondered what future there could be for Japan under the leadership of these men who had in the past shown their true colors as weak-willed warriors and defeatists. This leads to further speculation that he may have sought to ally with Ieyasu, believing that a Tokugawa victory would be better off for the future of the young Toyotomi Hideyori, whom Mitsunari may have later tried to do away with. Yet, this can all be debated. The safety of Hideyori should be called into question no matter which side would have won this conflict. What cannot be debated, however, was the recognizable fact of just how powerful Ieyasu's position was, which may have been a larger factor as to why Kiyomasa chose to side with him. What it likely came down to was this fact, that Ieyasu was the stronger force to back, as well as the fact that knowing Yukinaga was supporting Mitsunari, it would give Kiyomasa the freedom to march his armies south in the coming conflict and seize the Konishi lands, unifying Higo under Kiyomasa. It was of course going to be a risk, given that there was still a chance that Ieyasu could lose in the end, but luckily that did not happen. During the course of the larger Sekigahara War, Kiyomasa, working alongside Kuroda Kanbei to the north, were some of the only Eastern Army supporters within Kyushu, and would launch campaigns against the surrounding lords who had backed the Western cause. In the end, after Ieyasu's victory, they would be rewarded for their efforts, as Kiyomasa would indeed come to officially be granted all of Higo. Kiyomasa entered the Edo period as one of the most feared and prominent generals of the Sengoku Jidai, and relatively one who was still quite young as well, just entering into his 40s. But his immense clout and the respect his name demanded was certainly something the new Tokugawa shogunate watched with caution. Kiyomasa was still a staunch Toyotomi loyalist, despite his prior support of Ieyasu. One story even tells of a time when an emissary from the Bakufu was sent to inspect Kumamoto. It is said that the emissary commented on Kiyomasa's beard, a trend which was going out of style as more and more samurai took to being clean-shaven in the new age. The emissary had asked if Kiyomasa planned to shave as well, to which Kiyomasa declined, saying that it is good padding between his face and his armor. This was no doubt a highly suspicious response, but undeniably one that was purposefully made. It is speculated that Ieyasu always eventually planned to deal with the young Toyotomi heir in one way or another, and if matters came to war, he knew Kiyomasa would surely side with the Toyotomi. This could have massive ramifications if such a prominent figure such as he would throw in with the Toyotomi. Who else might come to back them as well? This thought must have scared Ieyasu to some degree, and is also one that Kiyomasa must have been aware of as well. In 1611, a meeting was scheduled between both Ieyasu and Hideyori, with Kiyomasa set to mediate it. Secretly, it is believed that Kiyomasa concealed a dagger within his clothing, which he would use on Ieyasu if any threat was made against Hideyori. Yet, although the dagger would never be used, the same cannot be said that deadly measures were not unfortunately used later on Kiyomasa himself, as shortly after this meeting, Kiyomasa would suddenly die after returning home to Kumamoto. It is not entirely known what the cause of death could have been, with some suspecting syphilis to be the cause. However, a more popular story that has arisen is that Ieyasu may have had Kiyomasa poisoned. This is supported by the fact that Kiyomasa's death was quite sudden, and the fact that another daimyo, who had also been heavily in support of the Toyotomi, Asano Yoshinaga, would also die quite suddenly just 2 years later, it is said from the same disease. Although this might all be a coincidence, others have pointed to Ieyasu skillfully picking off his opponents before destroying the Toyotomi once and for all in 1615. Kiyomasa's death is a tragic one, a warrior so highly regarded for his legendary achievements, to die not in glorious battle or at the end of a long and satisfying career, but instead early and perhaps due to poisoning of all things. But if this story is true, it certainly illustrates just how much even the great Tokugawa Ieyasu had come to fear Kato Kiyomasa. Sometime later, the Kato family, still under prime suspicion from the shogunate, would be removed from their land in Higo, yet the populace never forgot their past under Kiyomasa. In respect to this, when their new Hosokawa overlords arrived to begin governing the province, Hosokawa Tadatoshi is said to have led a large procession through Kumamoto and to Kiyomasa's mausoleum, where he asked the spirit of Kiyomasa to watch over him as he governed his old domain. Kato Kiyomasa has gone down in history as one of the greatest samurai leaders to ever live. He was not only a skilled warrior, but also a valiant commander and a significant castle architect. Yet, what probably sets him apart the most is the fact that he is perhaps the most militaristic samurai leader of his time, being entirely devoted to his status as a member of the warrior class and the conduct one should exemplify as part of a military force. He was both feared and respected, a samurai, a daimyo, a tiger hunter, one of the 7 spears of Shizugutake. Kato Kiyomasa was in a league of his own. Although I was not able to be a part of the monthly Samurai History Collaboration series for August, highlighting the topic of samurai leaders, this video can serve as my entry into that subject. Check out the links below to see other videos on this topic made from other great Japanese history content creators. And with that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.